Tori, and today I'm going to be discussing the books Openly Straight and Honestly Ben by Bill Konigsberg. So this is a young adult book series. The first book, Openly Straight, follows our main character Rafe, who is a young man who has been openly gay for the last 3 years, and he's a little tired of how labeled and restricted he feels by that, and he wants people to see other things about him. So he moves to a boarding school halfway across the country and doesn't tell anyone there that he is gay, and the book follows his adventures and the things he learns from that. The second book, Honestly Ben, takes place right after the first one and is told from the point of view of Ben, another boy who goes to the boarding school. So this is a series, but it really feels like one book just kind of split in half and switching narrators midway through. I listened to the audiobook versions of these books, and the first one was narrated by Pete Cross, and the second one was narrated by Dan Bittner. And usually I don't like books that switch narrators midway through the series, but this actually worked really well because it switches who is the protagonist of the story midway through, so it works very nicely. I had very mixed feelings about these books. I read them very quickly, I was very engaged. I finished one and immediately started the next one, and I think I listened to both of them in about 4 days' time total. So there were a couple of really good things about the books. I was very engaged with the characters and invested in their lives. I wanted to hear more about them. I really cared about them, and their world was interesting, and I needed to know more about it. Also, I think the author had a lot of really important things to say. These would be really good books for teenagers to read about figuring out who you are and accepting each other and learning how to deal with each other's differences and still have really good emotional connections and be good friends with a lot of people who are very different from you, and about learning how to accept yourself. So those are all really good things to talk about. Another big plus for this book series is that it's very fun, and there are some very funny parts and very enjoyable parts. There are funny parts, there are romantic parts, there are definitely some very good times in these books. But they are also incredibly stressful to read, and I could not put them down, but I was kind of flinching the whole time going, oh, this is going to end badly, this is going to end so badly. And it wasn't a major thing, no one was in any physical danger. There were still parts that were very uncomfortable, and I think that's intentional. So I'm going to share my opinions about these books. If you want to read them, go do it. You will probably read them in one sitting, back to back, and then come back and hear my opinions. So the first book that we got from Rafe's perspective was a lot of fun, and there were a lot of good things about it, and I realized after reading the second book that I enjoyed Rafe's voice much more. It was very fun to be in his head, and the first book only had one real downside to it, and that was the huge lie when he didn't tell anybody that he was gay. And so there was just one thing, and apart from that, everything else was very enjoyable to read. But that one thing is the central focus of the book, so everything that was happening, when he was having a really sweet conversation with Ben, it would remind you. Ben would say something and he'd be like, yes, I'm lying to my best friend who I'm falling in love with, and so that was that constant tension there. And so for the first book, I was cringing a whole lot. And all the other parts were fun, and I really liked being in Rafe's head, but I was just dreading what was going to happen, and how much Ben was going to get hurt, and how much Rafe's life was going to get ruined, and just all the awful things that were coming. For Honestly Ben, there wasn't anything in it that made me cringe as much as the first book, but it also wasn't as much fun to be inside Ben's head. In the first book, he just seemed kind of distant and mysterious, and you didn't realize how low his self-confidence was and how hard his life was. And I think these are important things to hear, but it makes it not very fun to be in his head. So I would say that the first book, Openly Straight, was very, it had lots of very fun and enjoyable parts, but it was also incredibly stressful. The second book was less stressful, but it was also less enjoyable, and I didn't like being inside the narrator's head as much. I also felt like when I finished the first book, the plot seemed very unresolved, and you knew there had to be a sequel because it just felt like plot details like, you still wanted more to happen from that. But where Rafe was emotionally, it felt very emotionally concluded and like the end of a book. For the second book, Honestly Ben, the plot details were much more wrapped up, and from a narrative perspective, it felt much more like the end of a book. But where inside Ben's head, it was still kind of uncomfortable, and I felt like he wasn't as emotionally resolved. The last scene, was a good resolve, but before that scene, there were other things that he was still thinking about, and I felt like I would have liked to see more. So Openly Straight started out kind of like a fun rom-com, and it's one of those rom-coms that always makes me cringe, where the main character is going to lie about something and there'll be misunderstandings and it'll be resolved by the end. And it wasn't quite, because Ben was still mad at him at the end. It didn't quite resolve that much, so it wasn't exactly like a romantic comedy movie, but it still had that kind of feeling. And I was really impressed. At the beginning of the book, you really do believe what Rafe believes, that he is just doing this because he wants people to see more of him, and he's perfectly comfortable with everything about his sexuality. He just wants people to see more of that. And then as the book goes on, you realize that even though Rafe lives in Boulder and has these amazing parents who are so accepting of him, there are still things that are really hard about being different, and that his life is hard, and maybe that was part of the reason that he wanted to try to escape it for a little while. And then by the end, it feels really resolved. He learns kind of that it's good to be different, and that his life will be a little bit harder, but if he embraces that, it'll be so much more rich and fulfilling, and I really like that. I also really loved his relationship with Ben in this book. It was so sweet to see just how much they connected emotionally, and to see them talk and just how close they were. And the whole time you were watching this, you were cringing, going, oh, he's gonna wreck it, Ben's gonna find out. And I was very impressed that Rafe did at least tell Ben instead of letting him find out, because that would have been so much worse, and I think it was much more healthy to just tell him, and I was very glad about that. So when I started reading Honestly Ben, I was just really wanting Rafe's story to go on, and I was excited. I wanted to see him and Ben get together, and I was looking forward to it as like an extension of a romantic comedy. But then once you're inside Ben's head, it's a much more serious place, and it feels a lot less like a romantic comedy. And I ended up being less concerned about how their love lives turned out, and I just wanted to see Ben manage to be sort of happy with himself, because he wasn't really. I really did like that the book started out with Ben in a swimming pool thinking about life, and ended with him in a swimming pool thinking about life. I thought that was a nice way to bookend the story. I loved the scene at the beginning where Ben got sick and he was still really mad at Rafe, and Rafe just took care of him, and he didn't ask for anything, and he knew that Ben had written that really mean note about him and stuff, but he really loved Ben, so he just took care of him. He wasn't pushing for anything, he wasn't asking for anything in return. He just knew that a person he cared about was sick and needed someone to take care of him, so he just did, and I thought that was so sweet. I thought the dance scene was cute, and how Ben just saw that Rafe was upset and heartbroken, and so he just went to take care of him, and they went and had their whole walk on the beach, and I just loved that so much, and I thought they were so cute together. So the funniest part of the whole book was when the four boys were all out and they were going to try to photobomb pictures, and Toby stepped on a duck, and they were all being attacked by ducks and running for their lives. It was just hilarious, and I loved it so much. It seems like ducks come up as a comedic tool in books a lot, and I don't know why, but it was just amazing. And I just kept thinking of the Cassandra Clare, all of her different Shadowhunter books. There's like a running joke about ducks in that too, and it just reminded me of that. It was very funny. So then the characters of Albie and Toby were so much fun. It was so much fun to watch. They were different, and I loved that they had fun doing things that teenagers would normally not think of as fun, like apple picking, and they just had so much fun with it. And then Albie and Toby also seemed the most comfortable with themselves. I loved Toby coming out as gender fluid in this and talking about kind of the left paths thing and being different. And I think this book had kind of a good message, which was that, you can put so much pressure on yourself to try to make everyone happy, your parents and your teachers and your friends and things like that, but that doesn't matter unless you make yourself happy. You need to make sure that you're living your life for you. And I thought that was a really good message, but I thought the execution could have been better. So for the first half of Honestly Ben, I was kind of behind everything and it was going well. And then I started to get uncomfortable, and a lot of the characters I liked in the first book I didn't like as much as this book. Like in the first book, I really liked Rafe and thought he was a pretty good person. And I really loved seeing his relationship with Ben, and I thought they were very good for each other. And then in this book, there were a lot of things about the relationship that I just didn't like quite as much. So, it was flowing along well, and Ben finally decided that he was going to listen to his heart and he was going to be with Rafe and break up with Hannah because he really loved Rafe. And so, he held Rafe's hand and then he broke up with Hannah and then he and Rafe got together and it was so amazing for a little bit. And then there was the scene where they were talking out in public in front of everyone and Rafe said, "Goodbye, I love you." And Ben didn't say it back because they were in earshot of their friends. And that is definitely an issue that they would have to work on. But it's also a very big adjustment. Ben is trying to figure all this stuff out and he's making a lot of big emotional changes in his head. And Rafe got really upset, which is understandable from Rafe's perspective. He's been in several relationships with people who would not acknowledge him, and he's really at a point where he needs to be out and open. Both their feelings were legitimate, and so, they talk about it, and then just a few days later, Ben makes a speech in front of the whole school where he says, "I love Rafe," and then he kisses Rafe in front of his incredibly conservative parents. And so Ben has just made some very significant changes in his life, and he has to adjust a lot. And it's still not enough for Rafe. Then he's saying, "Oh, so you need to decide if you're gay or bisexual or whatever. You need to figure this out and announce it." But his life has just changed so much, and Rafe just keeps pushing. And it seems like it's more about what Rafe needs than what Ben needs. I feel like it's following this trope that happens a lot in fiction. So Rafe says, "Oh my gosh, I love you so much. All I want is to be with you. You're amazing. You're magenta. And I adore you and would do anything to be with you. That's all I want because you are perfect." And then they get together and it's not enough and he wants to change him. And somehow it's this romantic thing that people think is romantic to say, "I adore you and you're perfect. Oh, we're together now, change." And I was sad because I loved their relationship so much in the first book and in the first half of this book. And it seemed like they had so much fun together and they could just talk and play and have fun. And then by the end of this book, that stuff had all kind of died away. Oh, and another thing, at the end of the book, Ben has kind of left his family, and he probably wouldn't be actually homeless. He would not starve to death, but he was very not welcome. He felt very unwelcome, and so he went to Rafe's house, and then he kept thinking, what'll happen if we break up? I'm dependent on these people, and he expressed that to Rafe, and Rafe just didn't do anything with it. And to me, it seems like if you're the first thing Rafe should have done was say, "Okay, I understand that this is hard and I don't want you to feel like you're forced to be with me, so let's make a plan and we will continue, my family and I will continue to support you no matter what, and if we break up, this will be the plan, this is how it'll work, we'll go stay, this can be your room, this will be mine, it'll be a little uncomfortable, but I still love you as a person and we will still help take care of you." And I just felt like Rafe and his family could have made Ben feel more welcome. Okay, so let me just say that this boarding school, in theory, the whole point is that you're going to get a good education and be more prepared for college, but the teachers and staff at this school are horrible. So first of all, we have this big prestigious award that Ben gets. And the way this award works is that you get it halfway through your junior year, and they tell you, "Okay, you're getting an award. Now, if you don't meet all of these conditions, we will take it away from you and publicly shame you." That is not a good way to reward students who work hard. Students who, it sounds like it was for very academically motivated, very involved people who put a lot of pressure on themselves already. And now you're saying, "Okay, we're going to honor you with this award. Now don't screw it up or you will be humiliated." That's just not healthy. Why would you do that? Oh, and then this math teacher, this horrible math teacher, why would she say these things? So Ben goes and tells her that this class is being too hard for him, and he's having to pull all-nighters, and he had to pull an all-nighter. And the teacher says, oh, well, that's good that you're working hard. It'll train you for college. What teacher encourages their students to stay up all night before a test? That is not healthy. Does she not know how the human brain works? That is not a good way to study. If you must, like, if there really aren't enough hours in the day and he has to spend, like, skip a night of sleep to study, he should not do it the night before the test. He should do it before and let things marinate in his head so then he would learn them better. Also, she makes some offhand reference to tutoring that apparently costs money. What kind of school like this doesn't have free tutoring? And she seemed completely unconcerned that this was so hard for him and he was putting in so much work. She should have been willing to help him so much more and work with him and sit down and talk with him. And she shouldn't have said, oh, maybe look into tutoring. She should have gone and spoken to the tutor and said, this is this person. They will be working with you now. You can be talking with me a lot and we'll get things resolved for you. But she just kind of didn't care. It was awful. This is how you get students to grow up hating math. You don't support them. So I thought it was really sad that the best teacher in this whole school was the one who would always give completely fake history lessons in the middle of game practices. And he was the most competent teacher there. I don't get how this is such an elite boarding school with, oh my gosh, we're such a good school. We're going to prepare you so much. And then the teachers and staff are just terrible. Another thing is any teacher knows that if you're going to give like reused material, you at least change the order of the answers because the students will find a way to reuse stuff. Why would you keep reusing material so they're just answer keys and you could remember a series of multiple choice questions and just get them? That's like basic. Good teachers know not to do that. And so the second we heard about these answer keys, then you knew, of course, that Ben was going to cheat and he was going to use one. And I was really relieved that, like, the pain, it only lasted for a little while. You didn't have to suffer through all the painful, oh my gosh, he cheated, what's going to happen? He cheated, and then, like, the book went on for a few pages, and then he told everyone about it. And I was so glad that he did that, and there wasn't some horrible thing where he got caught and kicked out of school. And it was like, bad things are going to happen, but because he told people about it right away, then I feel like his consequences will be a little bit better. Okay, so those are my thoughts on these books, and I'm glad I read them. I feel like they made me think a lot. It was not necessarily a fun experience, but I still got a lot out of them. And now I'm going to go read something much more relaxing and less stressful.